I believe I've mentioned that my favorite video game is Mega Man X, but just in case I haven't, Mega Man X is my favorite video game. Mega Man has always been my favorite game series, so having a deep love of perhaps the most critically acclaimed entry probably isn't much of a surprise. Heck, there's even been several people over the years who have declared this one perfect, but can anything ever truly be perfect? Well, in this case, I'm inclined to agree, but hey, I feel like anything can be nitpicked, so let's give the game a look and see if anything questionable jumps out. When I ranked all the mainline X titles, I said this one got bonus points for being first, since it established a lot of the tropes that made the series what it is. Perhaps the best place to start then for this one is what sets it apart from the classic series, which I'd sum up in 3 parts. The first is movement options. The original Rock could jump, shoot, and sometimes slide and charge. He also had a few more tricks when he busted out support powers like Rush's different forms and the second game's items. And while these certainly got the job done, it's hard to argue that his moveset was as fleshed out as X's. First, X can wall climb by continually kicking up it. While many stages are still the traditional platforming, go from left to right, this also allowed for the developers to add in stages with a lot more verticality. Prime example being Boomer Kuwanger's tower. It also gave them more options with what they could do with bosses, since throwing an attack that's too big to jump over would be unfair to Mega Man, but since X could use walls to gain extra height, as long as there's some safe spot, anything goes. X can also dash, letting him not only move around faster, but soar over gaps. This further ramps up what the game is able to throw at the player, since having a quick movement option means they can expect you to be able to dodge faster attacks, and longer jumps can make for wider obstacles. To put it simply, the climb and dash make the action much faster and more dynamic. The second big thing is the upgrades. Sure, Mega Man still got different weapons, he often got extra power-ups for beating specific bosses like the aforementioned items and rush modes, he could grab E-tanks, and a few entries, like 4 and 7, even had some extras you could search out in the game's levels, but each X title has at least 16 permanent, not one use or limited by ammo count, power-ups you can find scattered throughout the levels. Each main stage has a heart tank, which gives you a few extra ticks of health. What's neat about them, at least in my mind, is that no single heart tank is a make or break. You're probably not going to get into a scenario where skipping just one is going to be the difference between victory or defeat. However, getting all of them will make you significantly hardier than if you just skip all 8. If there's some that are just too much of a pain to grab, or if you're going for a challenge run and some will hold you up too much, you can choose to skip them, but you have to weigh how many you can get away with doing so. Then there's the sub-tanks. In Classic, E-tanks for one use and immediately usable, whereas sub-tanks in X, you can use as many times as you want, but you have to fill them up first. It's a lot harder to justify skipping these, since each one can help you compensate a lot and helps temper the game's difficulty. If you're a newbie, grab all 4, use them whenever the going gets tough, and if you need to, farm to fill them back up and blow through them again. If you're really good though, you can choose to just not use them, maybe even not bother grabbing them if you're that confident. How much you lean on sub-tanks is a good measure of how much better you get at the game. Back when I first reached the point where I could clear it, I would use the tanks on the harder bosses and Sigma would make me go through all 4. Now I only break them out for Final Sigma, typically using 2, but I've also managed with only 1, and someday I might not need to bother with them at all. It's a cool way to make your own difficulty settings. For other collectibles, there's the first armor, a set of 4 pieces that not only make X permanently stronger, but also change his appearance. You get the leg parts, you get the dash. This is the only time you don't have it from the get-go, and while I would prefer to have it immediately, at the same time, this was a pretty big gameplay shakeup, so I can understand them not wanting to drop it on you immediately, and wanting Papa Light to take a moment to explain it to you. Or maybe I'm giving them too much credit and it should have come standard and something else should have been with the leg parts. Let's call that half a nitpick. Could probably count the head parts as another one, given that it is kind of underwhelming. It has so few uses, mainly to get some upgrades in Mammoth Stage and protecting you from some falling blocks if you happen to do Chameleon's level early. It just feels kinda tacked on, like they decided they wanted a helmet, came up with a very basic function for it, then just threw in a few extra obstacles in 3 places to justify its existence. But that's just typically how head parts work in these games. The chest piece is amazing, having the damage you take. Honestly feels a bit too generous, but you'll hear no complaints from me. The arm parts give you an extra level of charge, launching a swarm of pink blasts that fly ahead, while also doing a bit of damage directly behind you if something's creeping up. This is great for regular enemies, ripping through swarms of smaller guys while also shredding those that are a bit hardier. For bosses though, it's not super helpful. Typically, due to iframes, only the first of your collection of shots actually do damage. For the time investment, you're probably actually better just releasing your shot early, but hey, when it comes to bosses, your special weapons are usually the way to go, so it isn't a big deal. And speaking of, that's the third big difference from this in Classic. With arm parts, you can charge your specials. Thus, each boss down gives you 2 options. Another point in this entry's favor, the powers you get might just be the best in the entire series. Normally, there's at least one with extra functionality, in this case the boomerang bringing power-ups back to you. The rest are largely used for attacking, but vary a good deal in speed, size, and angle, encouraging you to experiment and choose based on your situation. Things get really crazy though once you charge them up. In a lot of the other games, all this does is just have you use the special, but bigger. And while there are a few that are guilty of that here, a lot of them have actual functions just beyond letting you hit a bit harder. Rolling Shield gives you a barrier that just wipes smaller enemies out, which is good for farming. Chameleon Sting turns you invisible to let you bypass enemy clogged hallways. Shotgun Ice produces a platform that you can ride. The Flamethrower runs ahead of you until it hits a wall, rolling out a very different kind of red carpet. Honestly, this is the only game that I actually have all the powered up versions memorized, due to it being perhaps the only one where they're all actually worth using. That brings up another point that sets this one apart, that this is the only X game where you have armor parts that you can't miss. There's no way around the leg parts in Chill Penguin's level. All the stages were balanced to be beatable without them, so you're not screwed if you don't go there first. Things just go much smoother with them though, so grabbing them last would make for a good challenge. If you don't get the arm parts, you get the upgraded Buster from Zero instead in the first Sigma stage. While in every other X title, you can walk into the final fight butt naked, and the whole game needs to be balanced around this possibility, here, since you can't get away from the leg and arm parts, they could design challenges based on the assumption that you had them. While I know Buster only and no dash runs are a thing, there are some parts of the Sigma stages that feel downright unfair without them, and I think they were able to design some parts with that in mind, and that's another cool aspect of the game. Then of course there's the Hadouken, this game's secret, pulled right from Street Fighter's Ryu. If you have full health and put in the button combo, down, forward, attack, you throw out an energy ball that kills anything aside from Bile's ride armor in a single hit. To get it, you have to get all the upgrades and then reach your ledge right before the boss room in Armor Armadillo stage. 3 times with full health, then the capsule will appear. This might just be my favorite of the secret power-ups for a number of reasons. The first is that it's good without being game-breaking. Since you need to be at full health to use it, you can't just spam it willy-nilly and kinda have to be careful about when you throw one out, since rushing to get one off can lead to you getting hit instead. Still though, an insta-kill is an insta-kill, so not only will pulling one off save you time and health, but also let you feel pretty cool as well. Second, you get it late enough into the game that, again, it feels balanced, but not so late into the game that you barely get a chance to use it, like the Shoryuken in the next one. Third, it feels like a very video game thing to throw in. While I wouldn't say it's the hardest to get, at the same time, it requires you doing something that's kinda weird multiple times to get it to even show up. It's not the sort of thing that a normal person is just going to do, but the kid with a subscription to Nintendo Power probably will. It strikes me as a more elegant way of doing what they were trying to do with the Metal Blade in Mega Man 2, making it the secretly best weapon in the game so that more magazines would cover it. And fourth, you actually have to earn it. While I like the ultimate armor, needing a code to get it most times strikes me as a little lame, as well as it kinda wrecking the game balance and you being able to get it almost immediately. So yeah, Hadouken good. If you watch somebody play the game though, please don't spam chat with demands that they grab it. Not everyone can make use of it or even cares about 100%ing things. The level designs are all top notch, but hey, it's a Mega Man game, what did you expect? In the original X, each stage feels unique. No recycled biomes, not even in the final stages, which typically recycle a bit since they tend to be all one facility, just broken up. Most have fun gimmicks too, from a weird roller platform with strange momentum, to conveyor belts, to water physics that don't feel too painful, to ride armor, to even an elevator section, to name a few. The upgrades are also hidden in clever spaces. as usual requiring either skill, intuition, or both to claim, with the leg parts and Hadouken being the only exceptions. The former being a little too obvious, and the latter being a bit obtuse. Giving the role of each though, both feel appropriate. More than anything though, the game rewards you for being clever, and perhaps a bit mischievous as well. If you see a spot that you think the developers probably didn't think you'd try to reach, but you think you might just be able to, surprise, they already thought of that and have something waiting for you. Take the air control tower in Storm Eagle's level. In most other games, it would be just part of the scenery. Here though, if a player feels cheeky, rides all the way up the moving platforms, and questions whether they could land on it instead of just continuing with the stage, they're rewarded with a heart tank for thinking outside the box. Likewise, in Chill Penguin stage, there's a short roofed-in section that you pass through. In other games, I would expect that taking the time to climb on top of it would just reveal an empty, flat space. Once again though, you can find a heart tank if you blow up the right igloo. It really feels like there's no dead ends or wasted space here. When it comes to finding upgrades, it also seems like the sub-tanks are the easiest to get. Not sure how intentional it was, but given that, outside of the unskippable armor parts, these can be the most make-or-break pickups in the game for new players, making them so accessible is another point in its favor. And who can forget the stage effects in this game? Beat the right boss, and another stage will change to reflect this. In addition to making them easier to traverse, sometimes they also enable you to reach new places to get some of those upgrades we were just talking about. It's really cool that what you're doing in the game is having dynamic consequences, and it's fun to see what effect it'll have. It's actually weird that these don't come back more. I actually thought this was the only game that did this, but in a recent clip show, somebody commented that X3 does this as well. Good on Super Harpuya for catching that. They're so understated though, you have to wonder why they bothered. Seriously, when I looked up what they were, there were 4, 3 that I never noticed, and 1 that I did know about but just forgot. Kinda hope they make a return sometime down the line. This is easily my favorite staple of bosses. While I like Robot Masters, keeping all the bosses looking human kind of limits things. Enemies based off animals lets them get really creative, and since they seem to want to avoid going for too much overlap with the ones they use, the first game was the only one where absolutely every creature was on the table. They're all iconic, though being the first 8 probably plays a big part in that. You gotta admit though, each one looks pretty cool. And as we discussed, the weapons these guys drop are all pretty good. The fights themselves also have some pretty interesting aspects. A lot of them have visual cues when you hit them with their weaknesses, and while later titles do the same, you get some of the most extreme ones here. Chill Penguin gets lit on fire. Armored Armadillo gets his armor blown off and no longer has invincibility when he bounces around the room. And then there's Spark Mandrill, who gets frozen and thus spawned the term Spark Mandrill Syndrome, where using a specific weapon completely trivializes a boss fight. And sure, that's only 3, but as a bonus, you can also dismember Flame Mammoth and Launch Octopus with the boomerang, even though that isn't their weakness. Why they didn't do that this much after this game is beyond me. Storm Eagle can push you off his stage, making him kinda tricky. Unless you have the dash, in which case he's easy, making it so you need to not only consider weakness, but also power-ups before you fight him. Ram Dabongda's just funny. Launch Octopus counters his weakness pretty well, making you have to consider whether you want to just use your buster or stubbornly forcing these rolling shields past his missiles for a bit of extra damage. Kuwanger can grab you and chuck you into the ceiling, but if you have a homing missile out, and it hits him when he has a grip on you, you actually free yourself. Sure, you can just look up a boss order and clear the game that way, but for most fights, there's a lot more to them than simply choosing a weapon. The story's a pretty simple affair and should be pretty familiar to anyone who's played Mega Man before. There's a bad guy with 8 other bad guys you need to fight before you can storm his fortress. Unlike Wily, however, who just wants respect and to rule the world, Sigma wants to actually overthrow the humans and set Reploids up as the dominant species of the planet, so it's a bit higher stakes. While later titles get a bit deeper into story, here, things are kept pretty simple, yet it still manages to pull off some of its beats better than those that do put a bigger emphasis on plot. The main thing I'm thinking of here are the character deaths that take place in Sigma stages. Let's contrast Iris's death with Zero's here. Both are characters that you meet in the intro stage, both are your companions through the game, and both are meant to leave a deep impression on you. However, I'd argue Zero's works a bit better. Ignoring the fact that he dies protecting you, whereas you actively kill Iris, both are around for a relatively short period of time. In Zero's case though, this is the first X title. He's been around since the beginning. Him being around until then is a constant, whereas Iris feels like she was created specifically to die to add some emotional weight, which I think would be accurate. She was a means to an end. And since this was the first game, you didn't know what the stakes were. Zero dying, as far as you knew, meant that he was actually dead. Then you were given a little bit of hope when, in the post-game scene, Sigma threatens to return, letting you question whether he's maybe a special existence, or if there might be a chance for Zero after all. By X4, there have been so many revivals though, it's kinda hard to take Iris dying seriously, since if Capcom wanted her back, they would. Whole video on that if you're interested, but my point is, even though this is one of the simplest plots in the X series, due to how it was executed, I'd say it's one of the more impactful. Need I say anything about the sound for this game? Mega Man has always had good music, and the X series kicked things into high gear with how rockin' the tracks got. Whether listening to the original, Maverick Hunter X's remixes, or a fan reproduction, they're all really good, and playing some stuff for people who aren't even into video games, let alone Mega Man, have elicited some compliments in my personal experience. That's true for the majority of the X titles, but I feel it holds especially true for the first. Part of it might be nostalgia talking, but not only does each track rock, they also seem specifically catered to each stage. The intro highway leaves a strong impression. Chill Penguins is chill. Armored Armadillo is wild, perfect for flying around on a wheeled platform. Boomer Kawangers feels determined, giving motivation to climb up and rip him down from his post looming over you. Might be projecting a little bit with some of these, but seriously, the OST never gets old. The sound effects are also distinct, and I think if you played any of them, I'd be able to tell you that they came from one of the SNES titles, if not the specific game. The visuals are also very pleasing pixel art. Maybe I'm showing my age with that comment, but hey, I really like the graphics from that era. They're not quite as rough as the Nintendo and other previous systems, so I can always clearly tell what I'm looking at, while at the same time, being simple and quaint and having a lot of charm. Never thought it was a misstep when they reused sprites and kept the style largely the same. So why do I like Mega Man X so much? It's a lot of fun to play and does a lot of things really well, but so do a lot of the other titles in the series. Well, I'd say a lot of it is in the details. This game can be as simple or as deep as you want it to be. A cursory glance would label this one as the most simple. There's no rush to collect a bunch of parts from optional bosses, they didn't make the game hard by giving even regular enemies a ton of HP, you don't have to worry about playing through the game twice to get the full picture, and you don't have to worry about RNG determining how your playthrough goes. If you want to get through the game by just jumping and shooting, with maybe a little bit of 8-sided rock, paper, scissors thrown in, you can certainly do that. However, if you want to get really into the game, there's a lot to learn. I already talked about the nuance with the upgrades, the weapons, and the boss fights, but the game goes beyond that. It teaches you how to dash on the ground, but you can also do it off walls, which took me a lot longer to figure out than it should have. While all of these games contain some backtracking, this is one of them where you only have to return to a stage once, Chill Penguins for the heart tank, if you're careful with your order. Not counting the Hadouken since that's a secret. It's incredibly easy to farm sub-tanks right before Sigma, so if you use them all and still die, it doesn't feel like you blew your only chance. A friend recently told me that when you dash and shoot, your lemons do an extra tick of damage, and he also reminded me about the extra hitbox that pops up when you use your 3rd level charge shot. I've been watching a few streams of the game and I'm often impressed by what newer players come up with. While I typically get through much of the game, Buster blazing, less experienced players will use their special weapons in ways that are both obvious and creative that I've never really thought about since I never needed to. Despite this being an older game that I played countless times, I'm constantly learning new things about it, and that, I think, is what I like about it so much. Speaking of watching other people stream the game, I recently saw one that brought up something I never considered, having to do with Vile, or Vava if you prefer. In the first encounter, on the intro stage, he comes at you with his ride armor and you're completely at his mercy. Even if the guy had a health bar, it'd still be an unfair one, since, when he charges at you, his hitbox is too large for you to jump over and you have no walls to help you out. But hey, this is fine, since it's an unwinnable fight. He starts treating you a lot gentler when you're in range for him to capture you, and the only time I've ever actually died against him is when I tried to see how long I could last and his AI got tired with me. No first-time player is going to be able to drag it out to the point where they actually lose a life, so the fight does what it's supposed to do. It makes you feel weak, establishes that Zero is the coolest man who ever lived, and has you burning with a desire to get stronger so that you can take your revenge. The second time though, you're much better equipped. The game foreshadows that you'll be a match for Vile someday, and Zero even tells you, once you gear up to fight him, that you can take him. So I have to wonder, how are you supposed to know that the first part of this fight is still unbeatable? Honestly, this was something I never really thought about. Maybe someone told me, maybe I read a guide. Heck, most likely the first time I reached this point, my playstyle just enabled me to get through it, since I'm the type to test the waters first, then go into it full force once I'm comfortable and invest some resources. So I would have naturally gotten captured on my initial try. When I was watching a streamer play it though, and they started getting knocked around and asked chat if they should use a sub-tank, it made me realize for perhaps the first time that there really is no reason, or at least less of a reason than you'd expect, for you to assume that you can't take Vava that go-round. An inexperienced player could burn through all their weapons and sub-tanks on a fight they can't actually clear. It still seems pretty unlikely, since I figure a lot of people would do what I do and feel things out first. It still has the unfair elements from the first fight as a hint, and most people would wait until they're pretty low before using a tank, probably getting captured first, but I still can't deny the possibility. While I think the reasons I just mentioned are enough to prevent it from being unfair or a flaw, I am also extremely biased when it comes to this title, so I'd like to pass this one on to you. How did you figure out you couldn't win against Vava round 2, and do you think the possibility of a new, stubborn player wasting all their resources on him is enough to count it against the game? To say I'm curious would be putting it lightly. So is Mega Man X the perfect game? Personally, I'd say there's no such thing. People play games for different reasons, and thus have different definition of what perfection is. Heck, that applies not just to games, but really anything you can think of. One person's utopia is another person's hell and all that. I would say that it's the perfect game for me though. It controls well, it looks and sounds good, it's fun, everything seems really well thought out, nothing feels like a waste of time, and it's a comfortable length that I can just slam through whenever I want. Of course, I feel like I promised some nitpicks, so here goes. The helmet doesn't do anything. The dash boot should come standard. How is anyone supposed to know that you still can't beat Vile on the second encounter? Boss rematch rooms are better than just having them scattered throughout the last set of levels in a set order. That last one's a little weird, isn't it? Why did they do that? Probably an homage to the original Mega Man title. Anyway, those are all my petty complaints, but they're the most I can think of. Like I said at the top of the video, this is my favorite video game of all time, so it'd be pretty weird if I had too much negative stuff to say. But hey, what about you? Are you a fan of this game, or do you think it's overrated? And if this isn't the best Mega Man title, what is? Thanks for watching, maybe consider subscribing if you enjoy Mega Man content, and perhaps I'll see you in the next one.